Okay, so we're starting chapter 2 today, which is income. And in brackets, you'll see that it says salaries and wages. And I think that you're going to find a lot of this stuff is probably familiar. You've heard of this before. Maybe you didn't know what it was exactly, but we're going to go through that together. There's 4 ways a person can be paid. The first one is a salary. Second one is commission. Third is wages, and fourth is piecework. So we'll go through a little bit on what each of these mean. I feel like, well, are you familiar with salaries? What's a salary? Alex? Okay, so we can have a wage where you're being paid per hour, right? So let's say a wage for being paid working at a particular job is $20 an hour. There's that method of being paid. A salary is usually for a chunk of time. So for example, you could have a yearly salary. Does that make sense? So maybe instead of doing hour by hour, you don't really get overtime. It's just you have a yearly salary of a certain amount. And so it's usually for if you have an hourly wage that you would get overtime if you go over those certain number of hours. Does that make sense? Has anybody ever heard of time and a half? We're looking at this wages. What does time and a half mean? Richard? Yeah. Yeah, so for example, you know how I just threw out that example of $20 an hour? If you're working overtime, so maybe you're going over the 8 hours in a day, and you get, let's say, time and a half if you're working overtime, or maybe it's like a statutory holiday. Sometimes on those holidays you get time and a half. Instead of the $20, how much would a person make per hour? Alex? 30. Do we get that? So it's like multiplying it by 1.5. Time and a half means the 1 hour and a half, and half of the wage you would add on to that. Good? How about commission? Have you heard of commission, and or do you know what that is? There's different ways you could get commission. Yes. Richard?
So commission is basically like, for example, if you sell a car, and then the commission is like a certain percentage of the price.
Good. That was a good explanation. Did everybody hear that? So if we use the example of cars, a person that's working there might get a small amount per hour, but then on top of it, they also get a certain percentage of whatever the car was worth. So that gives them incentive to try to sell more cars. The more cars you sell, the more money you're going to make in commission. Good? All things we've sort of heard before. How about piecework? Richard?
So piecework is basically like, for example, you make this star, and then you sell this star like pieces.
Yeah, so it's not necessarily per hour or per certain amount of time. It's basically a task or an item that you're working on, and you get paid for that, right? So there's different ways that this can show up, but that's basically a general overview of how you might be paid if you take on a new job. An employer hires a person to perform work or service. I don't know. You decide if you want to write this down. I feel like you might know this already. Do you know about employers and employees? That's what I thought. So you don't have to write it down if you already know it. It's just if it's something that you don't quite know, then you can. An employee is someone who works for another person or a company. So usually the first day we're starting a chapter, we spend a bit of time just going through the vocabulary and what everything is, and that's basically what we're doing right now before we get into some examples. A salary is the amount of money you are paid over a fixed period of time, and it's usually monthly or yearly basis. We sort of already talked about that, but there it is again. And then we'll start getting into some examples. Like this. How many pay periods are there in 1 year for each type of pay period? If you have a monthly pay period, how many pay periods are there in a year? Yeah. 12, right? Because we're just doing the mental math. If you think about this, you know there's 12 months in a year, so it makes sense that we would have 12. First of all, we look at what does semi-monthly even mean? Chris? Half a month? So then how many payments would we have in a year then? Sean? We'd have 24. Does that make sense to everybody? So we just finished talking about there's 12 months in a year. If they're saying it's semi-monthly, then there's 24. Ooh, here's one that people often are confused about, or maybe we just don't normally think of things this way, but what does biweekly mean, first of all? What does biweekly mean? Every 2 weeks? Yeah, so then if this is every 2 weeks, well, how many weeks are there in a year? Good. I'm actually impressed that you know that. I feel like we don't often think of things this way, but there's 52 weeks per year. Did everybody know that? We usually think of things in terms of number of months in a year, so I think it's good for us to know that or to become aware of that. Because I think a lot of people think in each month there's 4 weeks. Is that true? Not precisely, right? It varies a bit. So because of that, we'd want to look at those 52 weeks. So if we're looking at bi-weekly, then how many pay periods would there be in a year? If we do the math on this one, Alex? 26 pay periods. Does everybody get that? So we're just taking the 52 weeks and we're dividing it by 2. Make sense? I feel like this is something that throws people off often because they're tempted to do the thinking of like there's 4 weeks in a month, which isn't entirely accurate. Good? So remember those 52 weeks per year. You'll have to know that, but you might not have thought of that before, so it's good to go over it. Now, are we good to move on? I can shrink this so that we can have it all. The next thing is something called gross income. There's gross income and there's net income. I don't know, you might have heard your parents talking about some of this stuff, or this might be brand new to you. But again, I think I told you this last day, the interesting or the nice thing about this stuff is that it's actual real life stuff, and it's not that far away, I guess, for you. It might be hard for you to think of it right now, but you'll be thinking of this stuff yourselves once you get into the workplace and you start working and earning money. So, gross income, it says it right here, it's a person's salary before any deductions such as federal or provincial income taxes are subtracted. Did you know that there's taxes taken off? So you know how we talked about that $20 an hour or the $30 an hour or that hourly wage? You wouldn't keep all of that. There's always taxes that are taken off of that. So there's the gross income, that's the amounts we've been throwing out there and talking about. But then there's also the net income, which is how much you are left with after all the stuff has been subtracted or removed from it. Do you ever hear your parents complaining about this stuff, about taxes? Well, do you know what taxes are for? What do taxes get used for, and why do people have to pay them? Chris? To pay the government, and then what types of things? Like, I know that people sometimes complain about taxes. What are some of the positive aspects of taxes? Like, it hurts to have that money maybe taken away, but if we realize what it's for, maybe it doesn't hurt so much because you understand that we're benefiting from it. So what sorts of things do we benefit from with that? Andy? For healthcare, for example? Yeah, what else? Alex? We're going to steer this in another direction. Chloe? Schools, yeah, for schools, teachers, yeah, what else? Anybody ever walk to school and see construction on the roads? Who pays for that? Yeah. Just so many of the things that are there to sort of help our community, to keep us safe. A lot of those things are there because of the taxes. So it's like everybody is pitching in to help contribute to those things. Does that make sense? So that's what taxes are used for, to basically help our community. Deductions are the amount subtracted. So I'll underline that. When we're looking at deductions, it's the amount subtracted from a paycheck. Federal income tax, provincial income tax. Well, do you know what federal income tax versus provincial income tax? What does federal mean? Rio? Sorry? The country. Yeah. How about provincial income tax? Richard? Just for BC. For us, that would be for BC. So do you see that there's different levels? There's different places that it goes to, different things it would be contributed towards. There's the Canadian pension plan. What's a pension? Anybody know what pension is? Chloe?
I don't know how to exactly explain it, but it's like the money that you get after you retire, after like putting it into a fund, or not a fund, but like putting it away, and then after you retire, you get it first.
Okay, good. Did everybody hear that? That was a good explanation. So basically, let's just talk about a simplified explanation of this. But for a pension, it's money that's basically taken off from your paycheck, but then it's sort of set aside for once you retire. Once you retire and you're not working anymore, you still need an income, right? You still need money coming in to be able to pay for food, shelter, all of those things. And so that's what the Canadian pension plan premium is for. Employment insurance, do you know what that is? I'm running out of colors. Employment insurance. EI is often what it's abbreviated to. Chris? Yeah, let's put a more positive spin on it. You're right, it is. So if for whatever reason, if you've been laid off or for whatever, maybe your company shut down, whatever happened, if you're no longer able to work, while you're looking for other employment, there's employment insurance that you could get in the meantime. And then union dues, this just depends on your job. If you are a part of a union, there might be union fees that are taken off. And unions are there to protect the workers' rights. So basically, that's a breakdown of all the different types of deductions that you could see. Some would affect only certain jobs, and some would affect everybody. For example, everybody pays or gets the federal and provincial taxes taken off. Overtime, we talked about time spent working on a job in addition to normal working hours, and we talked about how sometimes you get like time and a half or double time. Those are some of the terms you might hear with respect to overtime. So let's get into what we need to know this for, or what we're going to do with this. It's a word problem, but one that actually is hopefully a real life example that you can sort of start to relate to or understand. It says Ella is paid $30 per hour for her regular work and overtime at an hourly rate of time and a half. How much would she earn if she worked 15 regular hours, so $30 per hour for her regular work, and she worked 15 regular hours, and overtime is time and a half, and she works 5 hours of overtime. How's this? You don't really need it for this example, but you will likely for other examples, but you can use a calculator for this whole unit because I want the focus to be on the skills and what to do with this, and not to eat up all the time sitting there doing the little calculations that I know you all know how to do. This might be the only unit this year where you're allowed to use calculators the whole time. There's another one. What is it? Which one? How come Richard knows this and I don't? That's okay. So, $30 per hour, and how many hours did she do at that rate? So what do I want to do with those values? We just want to multiply them, right? So you don't really need a calculator because we could ignore the 0 for a minute. What would 15 times 3 be? 45, and then the 0 we just stick back on the end. Does that make sense to everybody? Right? But there are others where it will come in handy, so the calculator, I mean. Then it says she worked 15 hours. Or sorry. She worked 5 hours of overtime, this blue part, where she gets time and a half. So if her regular wage is 30, what is her overtime wage? Alex, $45, right? Does everybody get that? Because what did we do? We did 1.5 times the $30 that was her regular wage. That's how we got the 45. Everybody good with that? Then we're going to multiply that by 5, right? Again, we could use our mental math skills. We could even separate them. We could do 40 times 5 and then also do 5 times 5 and put those two together. Or you can punch it into your calculator, whichever you like. But what do we get when we do this? 225. Everybody good with that? And then to get our total, what do we do with these two values? We're just going to add them together. Can somebody tell me what her total was? $675. So far, so good? Are you liking this math? Oh, you guys, can't you just lie to me and tell me that you are? Do you like it better than exponent laws? Tough crowd. Okay, how about this next one? Daria has an average yearly salary of $52,500 and is paid every week. Her work week is 40 hours. What is her gross pay every week? I'm going to give you a minute and then we'll go through it together, but so much more rewarding if you have a minute to try it on your own first. See if you can think your way through this. Do the math to think your way through this. You know how it says her work week is 40 hours? Do I need that for part A? I don't even need that for part A, so don't let that throw you off. Well, we might use that later on, but right now we don't need it. If her yearly salary is $52,500 and she's paid every week, well, how do I figure out how much she gets per week? How many weeks in a year? Weeks. 52, right? Per 52 weeks. Does that make sense to everybody? So I'm trying to drill this into your head. You're going to have a lot of examples with where you need to know how many weeks in a year. But I think after we repeat it today, you're going to have it. You're going to know it just like you know 12 months in a year. Good? So basically, we just need to divide that out to come up with an answer. So you can punch that into your calculator. What do we get? 1,009.62 dollars per week. Thanks, Chloe. Was it Chloe? Yeah. Good? Everybody good with that? And because these are word problems, we're dealing with real stuff. If we're dealing with money, does it make sense that we always want to do we want to round to the second decimal place because we're dealing with cents? Good? So I want to look past the 2 to see what the next number is to decide if I'm rounding up or down. Remember that? What is her hourly rate of pay? What's a good, smart way well, actually, let's not cross this off. If her work week is 40 hours, because it depends, for some people it's more than that or less than that, how do we do these calculations to help figure it out? $1,009.62 divided by 40 hours. Everybody good with that? So we already did part of the work. We figured out how much she's getting per week. Now that we know that, we can divide it by the number of hours per week that she's working. And can you tell me what it ends up being when we divide it out? Thank you. 25.24 per hour after we do the rounding. I put the $sign twice. That's a lot of money. Good? Do we get the idea, the thought process, how to figure it out? So far, so good? Moving on. If overtime hourly rate is time and a half and her total pay working 6 hours, what is her total pay working 6 hours of overtime in 1 week? 6 hours of overtime in 1 week. I'm going to show you the calculation slightly differently this time, just to share a different perspective. Before we were taking the hourly rate and multiplying by time and a half. I'm going to do this time with the hours. So do you see that if her overtime hourly rate is time and a half, 6 hours, if we're thinking of time and a half, that would be the equivalent of how many regular hours? It'd be like 9 regular hours. Is that what you said? 9? Yeah. Does that make sense to everybody? because we took those 6 hours and we multiplied it by 1.5. Do you see that that will allow us to do the same calculation? And it doesn't matter, you could do it the other way as well, and we'll end up with the same end result. So we already had the weekly wage. What was the weekly wage that we already calculated? 1,009.62, right? So we just need to figure out how much she gets in addition to that. So 9 hours times how much? 25.24, because that's what we said it was per hour. And what do we get when we do that? We get 227.16. This is asking for her total pay. If it says total pay, it means take the what she was earning in a week, in any given week, and also take the overtime that she's earned, add them together, and then that's how we find our total, which would be $1,236.78. Good? Again, are we okay with the calculations and how to think our way through how to find this? Questions? Okay, well, that's it. Your work for today, oh, it's not on there. Let me write it down, is page 55. Numbers. Actually, can somebody check? Is it actually page 55? Because this is a new book, so it might be different. Which page? It is 55? Oh, good. Okay, so there it is. There's your work for the day. Page 55, 1 to 6 all, and 13 to 18 all.